We're live with Senator Jake Anderegg. Senator, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing well, Clint. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Hey, I wanted to have you on to get kind of the legislative perspective on everything happening here.
Sure.
The governor has issued a stay at home, what is it? A stay safe, stay home directive.
Yes.
Which, he had a press conference today. It seems like that is working. The data is showing that it's working to some extent. The Salt Lake County has been a little bit more stringent there. Utah County has not. Your district is in Utah County, at least part of it. Maybe you're also, part of Salt Lake County as well. So first, I want to get your take on that debate, which has become political, which I don't fully understand why it's political. But this idea of whether the state itself should issue a stay-at-home order or a shelter-in-place order, or continue with the stay safe, stay home, and leaving it up to the counties to decide. What's your take on that?
It's a really tough balancing act. What I mean by that is, we here in the state of Utah have enjoyed an unprecedented stint of record low unemployment. We've been below what is considered zero, which is about 3% unemployment. And this pandemic and its impact upon the economy really could create a scenario where we start seeing depression era unemployment. In fact, the projections of the economists back in DC and with a lot of the banks throughout the United States is showing that we could, if things continued on last week's trend, we could see ourselves with over 25% unemployment over the next 6 months. And that would be devastating to our economy. So the question really is, how do you balance protecting health, safety, and welfare of the public with this pandemic, and yet on the same time not cripple your economy sufficient that you create another pandemic like the Depression? I mean, very unscientific numbers are showing that roughly 45,000 people a year during the Depression, give or take, died due to starvation. So, and you go from 1929 to 1941, that's over 400,000 people. So the question is, are you potentially balancing one versus the other? And I think that Utah has, by and large, struck a good balance with stay home, stay safe, with it being a directive and not an executive order. But because it is a directive, the governor has allowed the local jurisdictions, the local counties, the local cities to enact even stricter orders, executive orders, like Salt Lake City did with, if you're a non-essential business, you can be charged criminally and cited for going out and conducting normal business.
Are you in favor of that?
Of stricter or less strict?
Well, you're in an interesting position. As I understand it, the district that you represent is partly in Salt Lake County and partly in Utah County.
Yes.
And so you're an interesting person to talk to about this, because the two counties have done pretty different things, right?
Yes.
And that's not an indictment on either. It's just the fact of the matter is Salt Lake County has, as you just mentioned, made it a lot stricter than Utah County has, and on the legal side of things.
Yeah.
Are you supportive of what Salt Lake County has done? Are you supportive of what Utah County has done, given that both are in your district?
I am. I mean, first and foremost, it's important to note that Salt Lake County is over 1.2 million people, and Utah County is just over 650,000 people. So we are talking about very different sizes. Almost half. Utah County is just over half the size of what Salt Lake County is. So it's not entirely an apples to apples comparison, but for purposes of the economy and business, it is very much the same, because especially here at the point of the mountain, Silicon Slopes, home-centered base there, 90 travels past that point. It just does, So the stay-at-home order, the problem I have with it, and I'm a conservative Republican, is what Mayor Jenny Wilson did is saying, okay, if you're an essential business, you can keep going. If you're non-essential business, you can't. Well, who's determining that level of if you're essential or if you're not? And you're basically leaving it up to, in many instances, not even elected officials who are directly responsible to the public. You're leaving it up to a bureaucrat at the health department who's making that determination, who doesn't care by and large if XYZ company goes out of business. I mean, 80% of our economy are these small businesses of 50 employees or less. And at this point, we're looking at close to 20% of those are already failing based upon the pandemic. So a cease work order, and someone picking winners and losers, you're essential, you're not, tends to be exceedingly problematic. So although I support the sentiment of keeping people home and keeping people safe and flattening that curve, I'm not in favor of how the bureaucracy rolled it out in Salt Lake County, and I think it will have long-lasting, devastating effects upon our economy. And I think the state legislature, at least, is convening a special session next week to probably draw back some of those things that were done at the local municipal levels.
Yeah, talk to me about that. That story came out, I believe, today, or at least I heard about it for the first time today, that the legislature is thinking about, passing some legislation to kind of curb what these counties and cities have done on their own with these orders. What does that look like? I mean, what's the current plan there?
Well, I think that we've been holding 2 or 3 caucus meetings a week right now, having discussions about how far should we go, how far is too far, do we want to be heavy-handed in basically dictating to what these local municipalities have to do, can do, can't do. And I think that we're finding a middle of the road pathway on this. It is important, just as a backdrop to this whole thing, to understand that the city and the counties are political subdivisions of the state of Utah. So they ultimately fall under the jurisdiction of the state legislature. And if the state legislature wanted to come in and be heavy-handed, we have our complete legal authority to do so because we created them. That being said, as a conservative Republican, I obviously believe that the governance closest to the people is the most effective and most responsive. In which case, I don't think a one-size-fits-all, mandate from the legislature coming down from on high and saying, this is how you shall do it and this is how it shall look. I don't know that that's necessarily a good fit, because Park City is different than Lehigh, is different than St. George, is different than Salt Lake. So I think what you're going to see in the special session is some drawing back of some of the time frames and some of the closures and the picking of essential versus non-essential. But I don't think you're going to see a pull the rug out from under them type scenario. I don't think you're going to see heavy-handed, because I just don't think the legislature thinks that's good policy. But admittedly, a lot of those policies are still being drafted right now. So I don't know exactly what we're going to come up with, but we'll have a better idea probably by the first of next week.
What else do you hope happens during this special session? Because obviously that's not the reason why this thing's being called, although that's going to be a piece of what you all are working on. What's the goal of the special session?
Well, I got my list here. Oh, you can't see it. It's my background is because it's a white page. I got 9 items that could be up on the special session, from pulling back or modifying some of the local health department activities. Right to try legislation with the malaria drug treatments. I know you guys have been instrumental in helping to get some of those materials brought to the state. There's some tax issues that we're going to need to look at. There's the governor's order on rental evictions, which I don't know that he has constitutional authority to do what he did. So we may see some modifications there. Some coordination between the state and federal to get the full value out of the CARES Act, the federal bailout, if you will. There's some education issues that we're going to have to also look at. Some elections issues, like with the governor's executive order on allowing for electronic signatures for signature gathering. And then there's some common sense stuff like vehicle registration deferments Like, do we really want you to go have to sit in line at the DMV right now? Probably not. If you don't get your vehicle registered, you're going to get a ticket. We're probably going to lack some of that temporarily. So those are a lot of the things that we're looking at right now.
So I want to bring up something that the State Department of Workforce Services reported this morning,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the number of new claims for jobless benefits was over 33,000 just last week. That was up nearly 16% from the week prior.
Yeah, I think it was about 29,000 the week prior, and it was about 4,000 the week prior to that. So we're
Yeah,
seeing a significant increase. And I think that is indicative, quite literally, of some of these stay-at-home criminal penalties that Salt Lake County and Salt Lake City have put into place, where quite literally you've got businesses that are no longer being, even with social distancing, right? You can go to a Zupas for carryout, and if you stay 6 feet apart with the shields, you can do it with face masks in a relatively safe manner. That's the order that's already been out there. But when we've shut down a lot of these things without really good evidence that it's going to create a big benefit to the state, these unemployment claims are the front line sign that we are really hurting our economy. Especially those local businesses that are having to lay people off or furlough them or reduce their payments. And now all of a sudden it has that trickle down effect of, well, now they can't make their mortgage or their car payments or their student loan payments, and then boom, 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 boom. And that's that slippery slope that takes us into a depression. I think if we don't head that off really quickly, at the same time of maintaining how we're doing the social distancing, which is pushing that curve down, we are legitimately heading down the road where we could kill our economy.
well, and then you look at the national numbers that were released by the Department of Labor today. Another 6.6 million people filed for unemployment benefits last week. And I don't see it slowing down. So I think this is going to be devastating
It,
for
it really
I mean
is.
I don't know if I agree or disagree, to be honest with you, on like whether or not the stay-at-home orders play a role here or not. But the numbers themselves are crazy. The fact that 33,000 people in Utah filed for unemployment just last week, and that's only going to rise, is a major problem. And then you look at these PPP loans. Have you been following that, and how the
Oh yeah.
federal government and the SBA has not been, it's been, kind of a nightmare for small businesses
Yes, it has been.
to get this money and to figure out how to, navigate this bureaucracy to get some funding in here. And so there was over $350 billion up for grabs, I think, in the first tranche. And then today, the Senate, McConnell, the majority leader there, tried to add another 250 billion
Yep.
to that program, and that got shut down. And currently, according to Mitt Romney, and this was maybe 48 hours ago, so maybe these numbers have increased slightly, but I haven't
Sure.
seen anything to show that they've increased dramatically. That less than 3,500 Utah employers have received a little over 700 million through the PPP program, which those numbers not nearly good enough
Not yet.
for the
Not
state
yet.
of Utah.
I will say this, because my day job is working at Zions Bank, and I will say this: these are unofficial numbers, but internally, I was told that between Friday of last week and Tuesday of this week, Zions Bank received over 30,000 applications for the PPP loan. So it's I think that you're actually going to see those numbers uptick significantly in the near future because these loans are in process. But you're right. It's one thing to have the idea of saying, okay, we want to deploy this money and this is how we're going to deploy it. But then it's another thing to say, what are the logistics of getting those resources into the economy, and what have, and maybe not very well thought out processes when the bill was put together. So, and once again, I have my own issues with how the federal government does things and how it rolls it out with the best of intentions. But I think that you're right. There could have been a much better process put together to get those out to the people.
Well, a quick question on the Zions Bank front, and I know Zions is leading out on this, and they're one of the banks that are doing these PPP things. How difficult has it been just for Zions Bank to navigate the various changes and to work and try to get this funding so that they can then give it to small businesses? Has that been a challenge even for Zions Bank?
It's been a challenge for all the banks. It was almost like we instead of doing ready, aim, fire, it was ready, fire, aim. And we ended up having a scenario where a lot of the rules that were supposed to be put in place came after the fact of the money being available. And so what's hard is you get this scenario where you submit your applications, you get your approval, and then the approval comes out and says, hold up, wait, we've got to figure out this, and we got to put this together. And it's not just Zions Bank, but because I'm most familiar with Zions Bank, I can tell you it's been a nightmare. I can also tell you that was last week. And this week, I believe, especially with the uptick in applications, I think we figured out some of our processes and internals to get things submitted in a timely manner. I think things are moving into more of a more streamlined phase, but the initial hiccups were absolutely there, and they were nationwide.
Jake, Silicon Slopes did a survey. Should I call you Jake or should I call you Senator? I don't know.
You know what? When I start insisting that you call me Senator, it's time for me to be done doing this.
All right, good. That's a good answer. So Silicon Slopes did a survey of more than 2,500 Utah small businesses. 65% said they are either likely or extremely likely to close their doors permanently.
Yeah.
Due to what's happening.
Yeah. That's what I mean. It's killing the small business economy.
Here's my question for you. And there's going to be a special session next week. There's a rainy day fund. And I'm sure you've heard, former Governor John Huntsman, push for, the state to tap into this rainy day fund. Is that on the table?
Everything is on the table. The current law of how we access the rainy day fund is that we've got about 6 key indicators that would have to drop and reach a certain point before we automatically can gain access to those funds. Now we can modify that law. I mean, we're the legislature. We can change the law however, as long as we can get a majority and the governor on board. But currently, we would have to change the law that says you have to meet these indicators in order for us to do that. Now, if we wait a month or 2 months, we will automatically be at where those indicators would open up the money for us. But the second thing that would have to change in the law is what those monies are currently being allowed for. And let's be clear, because we do have a constitutional constraint on income taxes. Those are revenues that are dedicated for education. And so you have actually 2 rainy day funds. You have the general fund rainy day fund, which comes from sales tax and severance tax and a whole host, about 30 different items. And then you got the education fund rainy day fund. If we open up the education rainy day fund, those monies are still restricted to go for education spending. And the general fund money, which is much smaller than the rainy day, so the general fund rainy day is much smaller than the education rainy day fund. But even then, it's still $300 or $400 million right now.
So we're still bumping into that amendment thing. That's fascinating. And to be clear, we're the only state in the country who has that amendment that all income tax should go to education funding. Is that right?
That's my understanding. I was aware of a second state that has a similar, fourth branch of government, state board of education scenario of management like we've got. We're only one of 2 states that does that. But I believe we're the only state that mandates in our constitution that 100% of education or income tax dollars goes to education. I think that's correct.
So if it's not raining right now,
it's trickling for sure, and it's building speed.
With 65% of Utah small businesses saying they're either likely or extremely likely to close their doors permanently, with unemployment claims over 33,000 just last week. I mean, if it's not raining now, when is it raining?
It's raining. It's just some of our indicators have a lag time. And so it's hard to say, is it raining yet? Is it? Oh, it is raining. Oh, crap. But we're 3 or 4 weeks or a month or two down the road before we realize just how bad it is raining. So I think that when you asked, is it on the table to open up the rainy day funds? It's on the table. It is just hard to get consensus of 104 legislators and one governor to say, let's go use those funds. Let's get them into the process of putting them back into the economy. There's also, just so that you're aware, there's a couple of working day rainy day funds, meaning we're a pretty conservative state. So we've been using cash on hand over the last 5 years to fund major projects like the prison relocation. Okay, that's a $900 million deal. We've been putting about 100 to 150 million into that, cash on hand into that each year, and not bonding. But we have a AAA bond rate, so we could turn around and say, all right, we've got 400 million sitting here for the prison that's just cash on hand that is dedicated for this. We're going to go ahead and claw that back, and we're going to go ahead and bond for $500 million to finish this out. And there's about 4 or 5 of those that we have in the state that we could open up some significant resources if we need to. Those are also on the table. One of the items on my list I didn't share was Senator Stevenson, who's the appropriations chair, and Representative Last, who's the House Approach chair. They are running a bill to open up a couple of those working rainy day funds, which don't have any of the constraints with the income tax versus the general fund tax. So you'll see those be in play as well.
That's super interesting. Well, thanks for coming on, my friend. I'm sure we'll have you on again as this thing progresses and as this special session gets underway. Appreciate everything you're doing.
It's always a pleasure, Clint. And if there's anything I can do to help you guys at Silicon Slopes or any of the businesses out there, don't hesitate to call me. I'm always happy to help because I think you guys represent a large portion of the economy in my district that is killing it. And we got to make sure that we are doing our part.
Thanks, Senator. I'm going to call you Senator at the end. Be very formal. I appreciate everything you're doing. Again, thanks for coming on. We'll check in with you again.
Sounds good. Thanks, Clint. See you.